Hey everybody, this is Nathan Jones and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you've clicked on this video, then you know what we're going to get down to. We're going to talk about the cinematic universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But first, a couple of things. One is I'm a big fan of the cinematic universe and I wanted to tell everyone this is my top 16-ish list, regardless to say. Also, I'd like to point out that yes, this is an X-Men shirt and yes, I'm crossing universes. This is another side of Marvel, but don't tell Disney. So why are we talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I would say it's because Thor Ragnarok is coming out in a week, and I'm really excited to see it. It's actually directed by one of my favorite directors, Taika Waititi, who has done What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People, among other things. He's an hilarious dude, and I actually was really kind of shocked that he was doing this for Marvel, because I always think of him as some kind of Flight of the Conchords, Office-esque kind of mockumentary kind of guy. But anyways, let's talk about Marvel Cinematic Universe. Since Thor Ragnarok is coming out, let me talk to you about my top 16 films. Alright, so let's start off with number 16. My number 16 is Iron Man 2, and this might, shock some people, but also at the same time, not really. Iron Man 2 is just not too memorable. I don't really remember too much about this film. I remember Mickey Rourke with whips. I remember Iron Man drinking all the time, just being meh. That's all I really recall from Iron Man 2. I haven't seen this in quite some time. However, it's not a bad film. It's just not the best. There's 15 more above it. So let's just move on to number 15. My number 15 is Thor Dark World. This movie is pretty good. It's just not as memorable. Just with Iron Man 2, it's just not very memorable. And honestly, they kind of messed up Kurse, and they also messed up Malekith a little bit, and I feel like they wasted him. But obviously, I'm also a big comic book fan as well, so these characters have a different life, obviously, on the comic book versus the screen. But this movie, it was pretty good, but Natalie Portman was in it as well, and Chris Hemsworth being Thor. So I'm really looking forward to the follow-up of this, because it's actually going to be a lot better. I can just tell already. Alright, my number 14 is Iron Man 3. Now, this could have been so much better, but I think there was a lot of clash between Shane Black and Disney. And I love Shane Black. I've talked about him numerous times on this channel. I've talked about Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I've talked about Predator. I just saw Monster Squad for the first time. He directed this film, and this has a lot of great, funny one-liners in it. And I actually think the dialogue between Iron Man, Tony Stark, and this little kid was some of the best parts of that film. But it's just not too memorable, and they also kind of mess up the Mandarin. And no, I'm not talking about oranges. Alright, so let's move on to number 13. My number 13 is Avengers Age of Ultron. And I actually have a little mess up here. I'm probably going to I can't get a new case because it's red. Regardless, Age of Ultron is a good film. However, I felt a lot of Marvel fatigue as I was entering this movie. This was between the transition to Phase 2 and Phase 3 of the Marvel franchise. And it's just, this movie's good, but it just seems more or less the same as the Avengers, the first Avengers film. But this movie is, it's good, but it's just not as memorable, and I'm going to be saying memorable quite a lot, aren't I? Ugh. But regardless, this is actually, the movie that we get the first actual Marvel death. You get Quicksilver dying because, X-Men has it. They also have Quicksilver. Also, I could just tell that Joss Whedon was kind of just done with Marvel, and this is something that he was kind of forced to do. It felt a lot like that. So the thing that I remember most in this film is actually the Iron Man Hulkbuster uniform that he had when he was fighting the Hulk. And speaking of the Hulk, let's move on to my next one, which is The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton, and it's not Mark Ruffalo, I know, and thank God it's not Eric Bana. I love Eric Bana, but just that movie's just garbage, and that's nothing to do with Marvel. But regardless, The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton, Liv Tyler's in it as well. This is actually I love this movie actually quite a lot, and to have a lot more above it is, saying a lot. But initially, when the first kind of 5 or 6 Marvel movies were out, 6, I'm going to say 6 because the first phase, this was among the top of my favorites. I actually like this movie a lot more, except for the CGI Abomination. That is Abomination. He's just, it looks bad. He looks kind of like a turd monster, which is Dogma, but we're not talking about turd monsters. But the Hulk, it's a good movie. I'm really sad to see that Edward Norton didn't reprise his role. I think there was a lot of dispute between him and Disney. But we got Mark Ruffalo, who's a pretty good Hulk as well. It's just definitely one of those movies you just sit down and you're going to enjoy it, and it's an enjoyable film. That's all I can say about it. Next on my list is another first phase film, Captain America: First Avengers. Actually, I love this movie. I thought it was actually a different take on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's definitely like kind of a more historical kind of action adventure. And it had a different tone than most of the other Marvel films. And it's something that I really enjoyed. And that's actually something I'm going to probably talk about with each of these Marvel films, is they all have different tones to them. And they complement each other really well. And they really think this out. And I can tell. But also, Red Skull. I mean, Hugo Weaving. I mean, I just really love Hugo Weaving. I love Elrond. I like Mr. Smith. He's an iconic kind of just dude. He plays Red Skull very well, and honestly, I want to see Red Skull come back because he got sucked up in that Tesseract and we don't really know what's going on with him. But yeah, Captain America: First Avenger is actually really enjoyable. Just like with the Incredible Hulk, I think this is just a movie you could put in and just enjoy, and that's something that I really like about this film. Next is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It just came out, and I have it on this sweet little Groot Blu-ray Steelbook case. It doesn't feel like there's as much stake in this movie. Now, Peter is meeting his father for the first time, the legendary Kurt Russell, and Ego the Living Planet, by the way. He definitely, it has a little bit more character development. That way you start feeling more for these characters, and that's something I really enjoy. But the first Guardians is something that you really can't take away from some people, especially the first time you experience it. And so I kind of knew more or less what I was coming into when I was watching Guardians 2. And I was actually really excited to see, more Thanos, or just more of that space kind of Odyssey side of Marvel. Alright, next I have on this list, is actually kind of higher than most people probably on their own lists, is Thor. I actually really enjoyed the first Thor movie. I thought this was a very well put together movie on its own. Just like when I was talking about Captain America: First Avenger and also the Incredible Hulk. I think this movie is second or third best with the original first phase of Marvel. I actually really enjoyed this. It's actually got a lot of quirky one-liners in it. It also has to me, it's lovable. You can love all the characters in this movie. There's not really a bad guy, because Loki is the first Marvel villain that you actually cared about, and that's something that they set up in this movie very well. He's not really a villain. He's kind of an anti-villain in a way. He gets into a lot of trouble because that's just his nature. He likes to be mischievous and really just pull on people's strings and do things, and he's really just trying to get attention. You see him really in the Avengers, the first Avengers, and you also see him several more times throughout the cinematic universe, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him again in this newest Thor adaptation. So definitely check out the first Thor, because it's really good, in my opinion. Next I have right here, Spider-Man: Homecoming. I don't have it in my hand. It's physically out right now, but I'm a cheap ass and I don't want to spend money on it. Speaking of villains, Michael Keaton plays the Vulture in this, and to me this is the second best villain that Marvel has ever gotten. And when I say that, I mean, I was talking about Loki earlier with Thor, where I was saying Loki is more of an anti-villain. I would say that Michael Keaton's character as the Vulture, he's an anti-hero. So he used to be a good guy, and he actually still is kind of a good guy, but he's doing bad things to kind of just benefit his family. But I really enjoyed the Spider-Man: Homecoming reboot of another reboot. There's so many Spider-Man reboots, I swear. But Marvel finally has it. And when I'm talking about Marvel, I'm not talking about this Marvel. I'm obviously talking about Disney. And I think this was a really cool adaptation. It felt like a very John Hughes-esque type of 80s film. Had some parts in it that really were just built on high school nostalgia, and they actually translated it really well to modern times and what we're looking at high schools and what kids are going through right now in these days. My next is actually Captain America: Civil War. This is actually was a movie that I was really anticipating because the Russo brothers did it, and I will talk about the Russo brothers in a second when I go more down my list. But this movie had so much hype on it, and I really enjoyed it, as just even without the hype. It's not as rewatchable as I wanted it to be, but this movie on its own is very fantastic. It has one of the most iconic scenes in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. That fight scene at the hangar between two opposing sides. This is one of the first times that you have so many people in here. You also have Ant-Man in here. There's a stacked cast, and this is also the first time we're introduced to Spider-Man. And this was just an exciting time in Marvel, and I think it was a revival. You know how I was talking about Age of Ultron being kind of that fatigue? I think this is what revived a lot of people back into the cinematic universe, because they're like, oh yeah, there's this big movie with a bunch of Avengers, because this is pretty much an Avengers movie. But, well, I mean, it's a Captain America film, because it's more about their Captain America and Iron Man's relationship and how it's crumbling. And this is a very loose adaptation of the comic book. The comic book itself is very, very fantastic as well, if you've never read Civil War. Different time period, different concept, because obviously this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe versus the comic book universe, which I've talked about a little bit before. So definitely go check out Captain America Civil War. Next on my list is actually something that I was really shocked by, was Ant-Man. This movie is very fun and very heartfelt. And this is one of the first movies that I actually almost teared up when I watched this movie. Two things. As I was filming this part when I was talking about Ant-Man, the train came by. I live literally next to the train track, and also my camera shut off for some reason. However, I digress. Let me talk more about Ant-Man. So Ant-Man was one of those films that really just made me feel things. And I actually was really pleasantly surprised about how humorous this movie was. Paul Rudd is a very sarcastic type of humor that I really enjoy. I actually think he's a welcome addition in as Scott Lang. I think that's something that Marvel does really, really well, is adapt something from the comic book universe and really translate it into a movie experience. And this movie will pull on your heartstrings just a little bit. Just a father-daughter relationship is just something that I have not seen before in this movie. And I'm actually looking forward to the next Ant-Man movie and the next Wasp movie, if there is going to be one in the future. Alright, now we're down to the top 5. And I have slight bias on this 5th one, and that's Doctor Strange. And I even have this stupid Best Buy thing here. Well, as you can see, I'm actually a huge Doctor Strange fan. You can't see it, but over there's a Doctor Strange comic book that is framed. I also have a couple more figures over there. I also have a Doctor Strange thing that I've actually it was painted for me. I commissioned this, and this is actually the Agamotto. And we have, Doctor Strange being deaf and just going into the eyes of death and just into this realm that I thought was just, I love Doctor Strange, and I actually have I have most of his comic book. But enough about this, let me talk about the movie. I was really excited and also worried about this movie. One is I'm a huge Doctor Strange fan, and that's me being worried that this would potentially be handled and not in a good way. Also, I heard Scott Derrickson was going to take over it. This is the guy who did Sinister, which I enjoy that movie alright. But he's a horror movie guy, and so I was like, what? I'm like, I'm very curious and also very cautious to see the direction of this movie. However, I think that Marvel stepped in really, really well, and also Scott Derrickson did very well as, as a director here, because the visual effects in this movie are just stunning, and also, except for Dormammu. Dormammu is kind of a mess. He kind of reminds me of Abomination in a way, but in a different sense. But I understand why Dormammu was portrayed the way he was. I also love Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, and so when they said Benedict Cumberbatch, I was like, actually, I could see that. And I was not mistaken. I think Doctor Strange, Benedict Cumberbatch, portrays him very, very well. And I actually was really excited to see this movie, and I thought this was a really well done adaptation. They got that psychedelic vibe really, really well that kind of made Doctor Strange the way he was. And he's always been my favorite in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and also just in the Marvel comic books. I had a lot of high hopes for this movie, and I was not let down. Alright, so what's number 4? Iron Man, the one that started it all. The first Iron Man was such an enjoyable film that really just opened the doors for Marvel to actually open this cinematic universe up. And that's something that I thought was really daunting at the time. I actually saw this movie a couple years after it came out, which is, I wasn't into superheroes at the time, nor did I really care about the direction of most of the superhero movies. And Tony Stark as Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. playing that character, really just, it felt like a role that was born for him. And that's something that I really enjoyed about this film. It's comical. Robert Downey Jr. is hilarious in this movie. It's almost written by Shane Black, it feels like. But it's Jon Favreau who kind of just started this whole thing out. And so that's something I really enjoyed about Iron Man. There's not much I can say about it. This is just it's one of the better Marvel films that really just got everything started. Alright, so my top 3. What do we have next? We have Captain America Winter Soldier. Talking about the Russo brothers once again. This is the first movie they did. This is the second Captain America, introducing Bucky. This is something that I really, really enjoyed. This is almost feel like a spy noir kind of thriller. But this movie kind of floored me in its kind of presentation. It felt like a Bond film, honestly, and that's something that like I said, I think every one of these Marvel universes have a different tone and a different vibe to it and a different perspective to take to add to this universe as well, and it all seems to fit really, really well. It seems like a welcome first step to the next transition, which was Captain America Civil War, where you see that line between friend in the first adaptation of Captain America, which was the first Avenger, but you can see it crumble in this as he comes back, and in the third and the final installment of this Civil War, you see him kind of come to grips with why they're fighting each other and whose side he's taking on and how much they can trust each other. And a fantastic addition to that, and I actually would say this is probably one of the best sequels of all time. When I'm talking about sequels, I'm just talking about Captain America itself, not talking about just Marvel Cinematic Universe in general. So let's move on to the top two. What could they be? There's only two left. So there's only two Marvel movies left in the Cinematic Universe. And what can they be? Two of my favorite team movies. The first being Guardians of the Galaxy. And Guardians of the Galaxy was the first time we saw a completely different take. And this is the first time you see Marvel stepping outside of their box that they've created. And Guardians of the Galaxy was just such a fun movie that took everyone by surprise. And also just took characters that no one really knew about. I mean, I knew about them a little bit from my comic book days where I used to read comics all the time, but I really didn't care and didn't really know too much about them. And so this is a film that got 5 unknown characters and put them to the top of Marvel because it had James Gunn at the helm. He directed this film and did a very fantastic job of putting all these one-liners in that seemed to fit so naturally in this giant space odyssey that they came together. They were all kind of Han Solo-esque characters. When I say that, I mean they're all rogues and they also really don't trust each other. However, they came together in the end to take on Ronan the Destroyer and really just show you what it takes to be a team. And that's something that I really enjoyed about this film. On top of, every one of these characters have something to love about them. So this is the first time that we have seen all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe come together. You had 5 films before this. You had Iron Man, you had Incredible Hulk, you had Captain America, the first Avenger, you had Thor, and you also had Iron Man 2. So you had all these characters, and all they had were independent films, but you could tell something was building up. This is the first time you see all those scenes at the end of the movies where Nick Fury, Sam Jackson, was coming to get everybody together for some kind of event. And that event was Loki fighting off the Avengers. He was going to get the Chitauri army, get the Tesseract, he wanted it back. This natural build-up for all these characters to come together and work together as a team, where they're all just so used to working by themselves and saving the day by themselves. This is also the first time you see the Incredible Hulk work together with a team, and that's something that's almost really hard to do because he's pretty much untamable. But they do it, and they do it really, really well. Joss Whedon, this is his first movie he did for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he did a fantastic job here. I'm a huge fan of Joss Whedon's Buffy, Angel, I like Cabin in the Woods. I like his writing style. It's super witty, and it's super dialogue driven, and also just about the characters in the movie. And that's something that I thought this movie was really, really well at balancing. There's a lot of characters in this movie, and there's a lot of potential for it to fall apart. As you can see, things like Spider-Man 3, or The Amazing Spider-Man 2, or even X-Men, the third X-Men, oh my god, Last Stand. You have so many characters, but you really can't balance all those characters out because there's a terrible formula people can fall into, and there's just too much. However, this one seemed just right. It hit all the right notes on all these different characters. You also get the addition of Hawkeye and Black Widow, but those were both introduced in Thor and also in Iron Man 2. The Avengers was one of the greatest Marvel Cinematic Universe films, in my opinion, and also just the first time this ever actually worked. Putting together some kind of universe, this is the glue that made the universe, I think, just come together. And I think this is the quintessential element and best thing that Marvel has to offer, at least in my opinion. This is something that just obviously is my opinion. Those are my Marvel films. I actually want to hear your thoughts down below. This is probably a longer video than I wanted it to be, and there's a little bit of ranting as well. But I digress. Give me a like, comment, share, and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. I'm not jonesing around.